I'll see you Thursday. I'll turn the light on.
Good evening. Good evening. I think we're going to get started. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Christy Williams. I'm the town manager. We're really excited tonight to welcome folks from UMass Boston Gerontology Department who have worked on the Senior Needs Assessment. We received the assessment about a week and a half ago, the full report. It's 91 pages. It's excellent. But if you don't have time to read all of that, there's a great executive summary at the front. It is fully available on our website, at the library, throughout Town Hall, here in the Senior Center. If any of you would like a full copy of that report, we're happy to print that for you. So please just reach out to anyone who works for the town. So tonight what we're doing is more of a deep dive into the Senior Needs Assessment to really hear from the experts who conducted this research. I know that a lot of you folks will get a lot of questions about what we're going to do with the information that we've received. And I think the answer is that our next steps are really to take in the information and make recommendations to all of the different departments. So this isn't just for the Council on Aging, it's not just for the Senior Center, it's really for the departments throughout the town to understand what's being asked by our seniors and to really respond to that request. So we will advertise when those meetings are happening, but tonight I think we just want to learn more about the report. So with that, I'll hand it over to Caitlin and Mary.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me all right in the back? A little bit louder, is that better? Okay, thank you. So, hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come and join us this evening. My name is Mary Krebs, and I'm here with Dr. Caitlin Coyle. We are going to present tonight on Aging in Westborough, a Community Needs Assessment. And so we're from UMass Boston Gerontology Institute, where Caitlin is the director for the Center on Social and Demographic Research on Aging, and I'm a member of her research team. For those of you who are less familiar with us, let me just give you a little bit of background. Our small center has been around since 2012. And since that time, we've worked with about 60 communities across the Commonwealth. And basically, we help them plan for aging of their population. And so the idea is that as a state university, our service and mission is to the Commonwealth. And so to that end, we work and partner with municipalities across the state to help them gather relevant data, and also to then identify plans for how they might develop delivery and support systems for residents aging in their communities. And so this is something that we've been doing for a while, and we are going to talk tonight about our work here in Westborough. So there's going to be three parts to the presentation tonight. First, I'm going to just give you a basic overview of the project, and then Dr. Coyle will present key findings from the research that we did, as well as recommendations for the town of Westborough. And then these key findings and these recommendations are basically highlights from the report that Christine mentioned to you earlier, and that I believe is available throughout town. And so the third part afterward, after those two things happen, is that we'll open up the floor for a discussion and question and answers. And so I'd like to start by talking a little bit more about people we'd like to thank. And so Kim Foster is the first person that we would really love to thank. We've been working with the town of Westborough for close to a year now. And she has offered us tireless support through every component and step along the way in this needs assessment. We also couldn't have done it without the support of the Town of Westborough and Christy, as well as the staff. Alma, the Council on Aging Director, her staff, as well as municipal departments who have guided us along the way. And so, in particular from the COA, we'd like to thank Guido, I'm going to get your name wrong maybe, Leonardo? Did I get your name? Oh, great. Thank you, Guido. And then additionally, our gratitude goes out to Shelby Marshall, a member of the Select Board, for her contributions to the project, as well as Jennifer Kirkland, the Recreational Director, and the Health Director, Jennifer Sullivan. And so, with that all being said, we'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of the many community stakeholders as well. Everyone who gave their time to participate in our surveys, our interviews, and the focus group. And so, again, we do this kind of work a lot with communities all over the state. And I think it's important to recognize that the outcome is only as good as the input that we are provided with. And to that end, you in Westborough really showed up to support this project. And we're really excited and enthusiastic about that. So thank you to everyone who hasn't been mentioned but gave their time and energy. And so I guess I just want to give you a little bit more background. We worked with Westborough to conduct the study, and it was really focusing on identifying the needs of the adult population, as well as any kind of gaps and interests that older adults in the population may have. And so we took a pretty broad definition of the older adult population, and what we did was look at all adults 55 and over. And so the report highlights are going to be presented this evening. And then I just want to say those findings of the community needs assessment are intended to inform our planning and development in the Council of Aging, as well as other programs and services that are provided by the Senior Center. But this is in addition to other municipal departments. And so I'd like you to please keep in mind that aging doesn't just affect the Senior Center. It affects services more broadly across the municipality. So the findings from this report are important to all the departments within the community. And so lastly, I want to let you know that the report seeks to raise awareness for the needs of Westborough residents among stakeholders, but also within the community more broadly. So with that being said, what exactly did we do after all this talking? We conducted 8 key informant interviews. Some of those individuals who participated in those interviews might be watching this presentation right now. We also conducted multiple focus groups. 6 were with a mix of residents from different backgrounds of various ages, municipal staff, and community stakeholders. A 7th was proposed for a caregiver group. We were unable to organize everyone together in the same place at the same time, either in person or remotely, because caregivers really bear the burden of hectic schedules and limited capacity for personal time. And so we took that 7th focus group, that's what the asterisk is all about, and spoke to a half a dozen caregivers individually, one-on-one, to learn more about their concerns and their needs. And so with all that being said, one of the things that we always struggle with in this kind of work is the idea that we know there are people who are isolated. We know that there are people who are maybe, for whatever reason, not able to participate in activities within the community or events at the Senior Center. And so what we really try to focus on is understanding more about who the individuals are in the community who are interacting and engaging with that more vulnerable sector of the population. And with that, we bring everyone together and we want to hear from them, which we did, about their experiences living and working with the adult population in Westborough. So The last thing I'd like to say is that we had a review of development and planning documents that were provided by the town. And then we did a mailed survey, which we received 1,633 responses. It was a very, very good response rate of 29%. That's very strong for a mail survey. And then within that, we received about 9% of them online, and the remainder of them were mailed to us. And so to kind of wrap up this idea of what our project was really like, taken together, the overarching process really focused on, what are the strengths and the assets that are available in Westborough. We focused on identifying gaps in the features and resources that support aging in the community, and then identified ways to improve the livability of communities for residents aging in Westborough. And so with that, I'll thank you for listening and turn it over to Dr. Coyle, who's going to present key findings and recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? Okay. If at any time I start to dip out of hearing, just yell at me, okay? So Mary let you know sort of the purpose of our project, which was really to identify and describe both the needs of Westborough's older residents, but also their preferences. So it's about what people need to age well in the community, but also how to thrive as they age well in the community. And so Mary described all of the ways that we collected information, and what I'm about to present to you are the results of that information, and I'll note where the source of information came from as we go through the presentation. But I want you to know that the recommendations that are made are based on a synthesis of all the information. So they weren't solely based on the survey results, and they weren't solely based on the interviews. They were looking across those sources of data and identifying themes that rose to the top, commonalities, distinctions, and that's how those the sort of findings that were lifted up in the executive summary were identified. So we're going to start with a little bit of a demographic picture of the town of Westborough. And what you see here is 3 age groups. The dark blue section of this graph represents the population in Westborough under age 45. The light blue represents the group age 45 to 59. And the beige at the very top represents your 60-plus population. And there are 3 time points. So starting over to the left of the screen is where we were in 2010. So that's based on the 2010 decennial census. And you see there that at that time about 16% of Westborough's population was what we consider in the US an older adult, age 60 or older. Data from the American Community Survey, which is a survey that's put out by the Census Bureau every year in between the decennial census, reported that in 2020, 10 years later, that the population of Westborough was now 20% older adults. So 1 in 5 residents of Westborough were considered an older American. And we have projections available to us. They're developed by the UMass Boston Gerontology Institute using a number of different assumptions about population change. And they suggest that by the year 2030, the population of 60 and older in Westborough will be 26% of your population. So what you can see, so that's important, right? So that's a steady growing of this older adult population. And we know that generally this is caused by a couple of things. One, people are living longer, which is a good thing. And people are aging in community. People want to stay in their homes, they want to stay in their communities, and they're finding ways to do that. So combined, and there's also the baby boom phenomenon, which we're experiencing as well. There's just a lot of them. But in addition to there being a lot of them, people are living longer and they're remaining in their community. So that's one point I want you to take away from this slide, is that there's a growth in this population. But the other thing I think that's interesting is that you see a slight, the under 45 population remains relatively stable. It's dipping slightly, but it remains relatively stable. So when we talk about population change in Westborough, it's really happening in this older adult population, meaning the growth is really happening in the 60-plus population, which is part of the premise as to why the town wanted to take a look at what people want and need to be able to age well in Westborough. So that's part of the rationale. What you see here is some results from this community survey of 1,633 residents aged 55 and older. And what you see is we asked people how long they've lived in Westborough. And what we see is actually a very interesting even distribution of age of groups. So meaning that we have folks, about 13% of people who have lived in Westborough for less than 5 years, meaning they're relatively new to the community. And that's compared with, about 24% who've been here for 45 years or longer. So you see the pieces of the pie on that left side are relatively equal, which I think is interesting to note that we've got people who have come to the community more recently in our survey population, as well as those who've been here for many decades. We also asked people about how important it was for them to stay in Westborough. And what we see on the pie chart to the right is that for over half of survey respondents, it is very important for them to stay in this community. And that an additional 31% say that it's somewhat important to them. So about 82% of the survey population think to some extent it is important for them to stay in this community. Again, laying the groundwork for, we've got a large group of people who are aging in our community and they want to stay. So how do we enable and support them in being able to do so in a healthy way? So people want to stay, and we know that. But we also asked on the survey, if anyone in the room took the survey, we asked very quickly in the survey what you like about living in Westborough, what do you value about living in this community. And what you see here in the center of this slide are sort of the broad themes. We reviewed every single response, categorized them, and what you see are the sort of top 3 categories that people like about the community. First being a sense of community. People really feel like there's a sense of community in Westborough. The location, and that is predominantly about proximity to Boston, with also having access to green space and nature, sort of the best of both worlds in some ways. And people also really value the town infrastructure and the existing services and supports offered by the town. And you'll see in these bubbles, those are some direct quotes from people who residents who wrote in on the survey illustrating some of these themes. So people want to stay in Westborough. There's lots of good things about living in Westborough. But in order for people to be able to stay and do what they want and enjoy the beauty and the location of Westborough, there were also equally a number of concerns that were raised about their ability to do so. So this was results from another survey question that asked about what are your major concerns about being able to stay in Westborough. And again, in the center box, you see sort of the top 5 themes that people wrote in about. Number 1, probably not surprising to those of you in the community, but number 1 by and far was affordability and cost of living. Of being able to, a concern about being able to stay in this community is that cost of living and affordability. Coming in second was the ability to maintain current housing. So things like housing upkeep, yard work, maintenance, repair, just the fact of having a lot of property or a big house to maintain, that becoming difficult. Talking about access to amenities and services, especially as health changes, people wanting to be able, that speaks a little bit to transportation, which we'll get into in a little while. Also, overall global sense of wanting to stay healthy and independent, big goal. And interestingly, a recognition or a perception that older adults are not considered a priority in Westborough. That was also written in about. And again, you see a smattering of quotes that are directly from the survey results. So there's a lot going on in Westborough positively, but also some concerns about people being able to stay. We asked about housing in particular. We asked a couple of questions. So the pie chart that you see here is the result of a question that asked about whether or not you currently have a bedroom and a bathroom on the entry level of your home. That we use that as a proxy, an indicator of saying that the housing stock is what, quote unquote, age friendly. The idea that you could stay there if your mobility deteriorated and you needed to live on the entry level. 37% of survey respondents said no, they do not have that ability in their current home, suggesting that if their mobility were to change, they would have to make adjustments to their home or find somewhere else to live. And we know housing is of a great shortage in our state. The other sort of more busy bar graph that you see here is the results of a question asking people if they had to move because of a health or physical ability change, what kind of housing would they like to see in Westborough? So this is we're making the assumption people don't want to move. So we're making that assumption and we're kind of prompting them and saying, if you had to, what kind of housing would you like? And what we see, this is also categorized by age group. So for those who are in their 50s, the youngest survey respondents, their first preference for a different kind of housing is a smaller single-family home, meaning they want that sort of single-family home lifestyle, but they want something smaller than what they currently have. For those in their 60s, their number one choice was also a smaller single-family home, coming in close with a senior independent living community. For those in their 70s, that senior independent living community was their number one choice of type of housing. For those of you who aren't familiar with lingo around senior housing, a senior independent living community just means that it's a place that was designed for aging. So it's designed with extra wide entryways and grab bars and entry-level access. It was designed. It doesn't mean that there's any assistance provided within the housing, so you have to be independent to live there, but it was designed, in theory, for people to age in place. For those who are the oldest old, for those in their 80s, their preference was for an assisted living facility. And that does mean that there is both accessibility of the housing, but also the opportunity to get access to services and supports, things like meals, transportation, and some like home care that would allow them to age independently. So a little bit of a range of what people want to see as far as housing options, but I think it speaks to the general trend of people wanting to stay in their home and remain independent. We also asked about transportation. This again is from the survey. So 12% of survey respondents report that they drive with some limitations. So we asked people about their current driving status, whether they currently drive themselves, no issues, they do not drive at all, or they drive themselves but they limit their driving in some way to make it safer. So things like avoiding driving at night, avoiding highway driving, that kind of thing. So 12% report some limitations, and 7% say they do not drive at all. Of the respondents who are age 80 and over, 24% of them do not drive at all. So a quarter of the oldest old report not driving. When we asked about how people do get around, most drive themselves, but the second most common way of getting around is having a family or a spouse drive them, so relying on family or friends, and 18% of survey respondents report biking or walking to get around. We also asked whether they, in the last year, have had to miss, cancel, or reschedule a medical appointment because of a lack of transportation. And what you see in this bar graph is the results of that question by driving status. So among people who do not drive at all, 23% of them have had to miss, cancel, or reschedule a medical appointment in the last year because of a lack of transportation. That drops to about 9% of people who report some limited driving. They limit their driving in some way, so 9% of them have had to miss or cancel or reschedule a medical appointment because of transportation. And then for those who drive no problem, 2% had that experience. So again, this I think highlights the fact that for those who are able to drive with no issue, transportation may not be top of mind. But for those who are thinking about changing the way they drive or not driving at all, access to very basic services and supports like healthcare become very challenging because of the lack of transportation. The other finding that stood out to us is that we asked about whether survey respondents have provided care to someone who is disabled or frail in the last 5 years. Mary already mentioned the challenges faced by many folks who are providing this kind of family caregiving. And what we saw in the survey respondents is that 36% of all survey respondents report, yes, I have provided care to someone who is frail or disabled in the last 5 years. This is slightly higher, 44% of those in their 50s and 40% of those in their 60s report having provided this care. So when we think about who's at the senior center, who's not at the senior center, who's participating in the town, and who's not, you can add to your list of reasons that some folks are really busy providing family care to people who are frail or sick. Among these caregivers, we asked them how difficult it was for them. And so what you see in the bulleted text on this slide is that 75% of caregivers in their 50s and 60s reported that this experience was very challenging for them to do the caregiving and maintain their daily responsibilities. The reasons, so when people are providing this care, it's limiting their daily life and their availability of time and energy. And when we asked about why they're providing care, so what conditions do people have, the number one was mobility limitations. 62% of people are providing care to someone who has just a general mobility issue. But dementia was the second most commonly related reason for providing care, and that was for 37% of caregivers. They are providing care to someone who's living with dementia of some kind, and we know that that comes with its own set of challenges. Mary mentioned the caregiver focus group, and there they really illustrated this idea of the time and effort that's needed, not just to provide the care, but to figure out how to get help. Where do I go? Who do I call? This sort of identifying of resources in and outside of the community. You see a quote of a caregiver in the bubble there. And we also asked, for those who said they provided care, we asked what supports would be or would have been helpful to you in this time. And the bar graph here shows you that the two things that people said they wish they had more of, number one is informal support from family and friends, and number two is formal in-home caregiver or homemaking services. So someone to come in and help take some of the burden of the home care, the chores around the home, and also that sort of interpersonal support from family and friends. Okay, we're going to move into the set of results that specifically are about the Westborough Council on Aging and Senior Center. We asked folks about their participation at the Westborough Senior Center, and what you see here is the proportion of attendees, people who say, yes, I participate at the Westborough Senior Center, by age. And what we see here is a very normal, very typical distribution, which is you have about 11% of people in their 50s who have said, yes, I participated something at the Westborough Senior Center, and that steeply rises with age. So by the time we get to folks in their 80s, 63% of survey respondents in their 80s report participating here at the Westborough Senior Center. Interestingly, 61% of survey respondents reported never having been here. So the survey data that we're presenting includes a lot of information from people who've not ever been to the Westborough Senior Center, so that's important to recognize. And when we look at the frequency of participation, so we isolated the people who said, yes, I participate. We asked them, how frequently do you come? And 63% go a few times a year, 18% go monthly, and 19% go weekly. So for the core 18 and 19% of folks who come here on a weekly or daily basis, clearly it's providing a lot of benefit and resource to them. And then there's this larger group of people who do come, but they come periodically for an event on an annual or semi-annual basis. So lots of variation. The Senior Center was very clearly valued as an asset in the community. We asked survey respondents if they see the Senior Center as playing a role in the lives of themselves or loved ones or neighbors. And we see that 66% said yes, that the Westborough Senior Center plays a valuable role in my life or in the life of someone I care about. We also show a number of written-in comments from survey participants about illustrating their value for the Senior Center, talking about how it's a wonderful service, talking about the events are great, and that they should, but there was this underlying tone that it's a great asset, but more can be done. So we highly value the Senior Center, but we also recognize that more can be done. So we're going to dig in a little bit to that. We asked people about what keeps you from coming to the Senior Center. So what factors limit your participation? And what you see here are two groups. The dark blue are for people who say, yes, I participate at the Westborough Senior Center. So we're calling them attendees. The light blue are people who say, I've never been to the Westborough Senior Center, and those are non-attendees. And so what we are trying to illustrate here is what's the difference? What are the things that limit people who come every once in a while versus what are the factors that limit people from coming at all? And there's a couple of interesting distinctions. First, for non-attendees, 42% say they are still working. Therefore, they can't come to the Senior Center. And 40% of them report that they don't need services. And I think that's an important distinction because there's this general thread throughout the report. There's a perception that you have to have a need to come to the Senior Center, that you have to have some kind of health or economic need, and we know that that's not the case. But there's definitely a perception that I don't have a need to go to the Senior Center, therefore I don't go. So those are some of the top things rated by non-attendees. When we look at attendees, the things that would increase, there are the factors that limit their participation. And one is that they also say they don't need services. So 36% say they don't need the services. But also they say that they're not interested in the programs that are offered. And that's about 25% of people who are current attendees. Again, speaking to people who come maybe infrequently, maybe they would come more often if they found more things that aligned with their interests. We also asked them, so the first was what keeps you from participating, and we asked it in the flip side of that, which is what would get you to come more often? What would make it more likely for you to come? And among attendees, the number one thing that would make them more likely to come is programs and services that are better suited to their needs and interests, having more knowledge about what is available. 26% reported that if the space was more comfortable and inviting. And about a quarter percent of attendees say if it included residents of all ages and functioned as a community center, something that was a little bit more open to the whole community, that would increase their likelihood of participating. For non-attendees, so people who have never been to the Westborough Senior Center, the things that would get them to come, number one is if they had more knowledge about what was available, if it included residents of all ages and functioned as a community center, and if programs and services were better suited to my needs and interests. So there's this general sense, really across both groups, but more specifically the non-attendees, there's an interest in, obviously, knowledge. People, they need to know what's going on. But this idea that what happens at the Senior Center, the kinds of programs, the kind of people that come to the Senior Center, broadening that and thinking about it in a more dynamic way would get them to come. And there was also 25% who took the time to write in another reason that would get them to come. And we asked if I would be more likely to come to the Westborough Senior Center if programs and services were better suited to my needs. Again, 43% of attendees said that, yeah, this would make it more likely for them to come, followed by having more knowledge, followed by having the space be more inviting, and similarly, for non-attendees, having more information about what's available, if it included residents of all ages, the similar kinds of trends. When people wrote in other, those things included not having any interest or time, but will participate later, which I think is an interesting thing to issue. We heard a lot about this idea that I love the Senior Center and I will come later.
When you're not.
People are really glad it's here and they think about it as part of their future. They're just not there yet. There was talk of the location being difficult to access, the physical space being unappealing, and there were a number of people who wrote in specific ideas for additional programming. So that was, when people wrote in other, and they told us in their own words, that's what we heard. So we asked them about what kinds of things do you want to do? What are the things you want to see more of at the Westborough Senior Center? This is across all participants. And so the top things were educational programming, day trips, performances, outdoor fitness, and indoor fitness. Those are sort of the top five things that people would like to do. And you can see, about a third are interested in arts programming and social activities as well. So when we think about space, obviously things like educational programming, performances, art, day trips, all of that requires kinds of space, kinds of staff that will be able to enable that happening. So that's one thing to think about. But we also asked about if there were to be a new senior center or a community center or some kind of new social center in Westborough, what are the preferences for the kind of options that we might be looking at? And so what you see in this bar graph are the different age groups and their preferences. And so what we see is that among folks in their 50s, about half, 52%, would prefer an all-ages community center, including designated space and programming for adults age 60 and older. So thinking community center building with dedicated programming and space for seniors. People in their 60s, 45%. So again, the top preference is for that all-ages community center with designated programming and space. When we get to folks in their 70s and 80s, we see a smaller proportion interested still in the 70s. Their number one choice was this all-ages community center with designated space and programming. And among those in their 80s, very interesting, 35%, the number one response was that they have no preference, which I found a little bit surprising. So again, I think broadly, there's support for a central place for people to gather with the recognition of seniors having dedicated space and programming. So I'm going to just walk through the recommendations. The report, as Christy mentioned, is very long and includes a lot more information than what I've provided here. And I'm not going to go into every single detail about the recommendations, but I want to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we're proposing, which the town will take and make their own, which is the way it goes. First, reflective of this finding around cost of living and the availability of downsizing options as being perceived challenges. We know that there are a number of conversations happening statewide and locally about housing options and development of housing, and we recommend that the Senior Center and the town continue to promote awareness of what these different housing options are, and also to get people to think proactively about their housing choice, thinking about, instead of waiting until I have no choice and I have to leave because I have no other way of surviving, I'm thinking about how can I be proactive in my current space and make the decision for myself around housing, whether that's putting on an addition, making a change, what have you. Also, there are a number of property tax relief programs that the town offers, and we're recommending that we continue to promote awareness about those property tax relief programs, and also thinking about moving towards relaxing some of those requirements, eligibility requirements, so that more people are made eligible for those things. And one way to do that is to document the number of people who are turned away because maybe they have too much assets or they don't qualify for the program. And to also think about other incentives around either discounts or cash for volunteers, people who are willing to give up their time. Supplementary transportation is also needed, especially, as I mentioned, for people who are in their 80s or have limit their driving in some way. So we really heard, broadly speaking, if I were to just make recommendations based off the whole survey population, I'd say transportation is not such a big deal. But when I look more specifically at people who are limiting their driving or not driving at all, we see very clearly that that is an issue for people who need it. So there are a number of ways to do that in terms of, travel training programs where people really figure out, okay, if I take this bus to that train to this location, I can get to my doctor on time, and actually having somebody come with them as a companion and sort of show them how to do that and make the transfers. And also thinking about just really making residents aware of what doesn't exist, because there are a number of transportation options available in Westborough, and thinking about how do we target those messages specifically to people who need it, and make sure that we're sort of emphasizing the marketing to the right people. When it comes to caregiving, there were a number of recommendations around how do we support people who are providing care to a family member or a friend, specifically around dementia as well. And there's a number of ways to do that, things like revisiting or reviving or collaborating with other communities around a memory cafe, which is really a social setting for people who are living with dementia and their care partners. and to think about, there's a number of ways to sort of get the word out about what's available to caregivers. So we mentioned a resource fair or caregivers night out where we're able to provide a little bit of respite and showcase the number of resources that are available to caregivers. Thinking about the awareness and understanding of the Westborough Senior Center, we recognize it's a little uneven across residents, particularly those who are under age 70. I mentioned this idea of there being a perception that you have to have a need to come to the Senior Center, and so thinking about how do we, and we also heard a lot about if I had more information about what's available, I might participate. So how do we do that? How do we think about getting information about what's going on at the Senior Center into the community in a more exciting way or more obvious way? And then also, how do we think about changing the narrative around the fact that you don't have to be disabled or be low income to come to the Senior Center. Everyone's welcome, and there's lots of vibrant things happening here. We also make the recommendation, or the findings suggest that people believe that the physical space does not currently meet the needs and interests of the range of Westborough residents who are in this older adult population, recognizing once again that when we talk about 60 plus, there's about 4 generations of people in that age bracket. And so we're talking about a wide range of interests and needs, and that in order to provide the things that people want and need, rethinking the space is needed. We recommend this sort of rebranding effort. There's also the concept of age and dementia-friendly community designation, which is a global designation that you can apply for and attain about being recognized as a community that's dedicated to becoming age and dementia-friendly in a variety of ways. And also thinking about how to update the current space to make it more welcoming and more inviting, and also to think about how do we use the community more broadly. So Mary mentioned at the very beginning this notion that aging does not just happen in the 4 walls of the Senior Center. It happens in our community more broadly. It affects all town departments. It affects all people. Aging is one of the great equalizers. It happens to everyone. And so how do we think about integrating the Senior Center into the community more broadly, whether that be through satellite programs, things that are hosted by the Senior Center but are perhaps delivered in other locations. We recognize that there's an interest in sort of this personal growth and enrichment, so things like physical indoor and outdoor exercise, performances, education. People want to better themselves. They want to learn new things. They want to stay active. And how do we think about programs that align with those interests? And how do we get new people to come to the Senior Center? So we offer a number of recommendations around the use of technology to do that, as well as how to welcome first-time participants, people who may be a little hesitant to show up. How do we incentivize them to come and to engage? And then we saw that there was broad support for this for a new community center that has specifically has opportunities for people of all ages to participate, with the detail of having designated space and programming for seniors. And that's just the surface, right? So we recommend continuing that conversation, continuing to hear from the community about that, and think about how to move forward on that particular issue. And we've cited a couple of communities that have done something similar that we could look to as examples. And again, thinking about this report is one step in the direction of thinking about aging across municipal departments, recognizing this is not just a Senior Center issue, this is a community-wide issue. So how do we take this report and move forward in a way that recognizes that Westborough as a whole respects and honors their older adult population, again, not just in terms of what happens here at the Senior Center, but how people feel living in this community. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm happy to take questions. I think what we'll do is, if you would raise your hand, I can come to you with the microphone, and I would ask that you speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear your question. You want to help me with that, Mary? Sure. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully it's very exciting.
So to the point, starting right here.
I hope I have my thoughts together, but very early on it was mentioned that seniors in Westborough don't always can think that they're a priority, and you ended just by saying, let's change the senior center, so it's not for seniors, it's for everybody. I'm sorry, but I really feel that as seniors, I like the senior center as a senior center. I don't think anybody in Westborough really looks at it in terms of, there's nothing there for me. The senior center provides a newsletter that is placed everywhere in the town. If they don't know what's going on at the senior center, it's because they're not picking it up and reading it. But information about programs that cover everything from health needs to exercise to music to entertainment and what have you. As I say, I don't think I have my thoughts together, but I think you get my point. And one last issue. You mentioned how do people get around? What's their main source? I am 93 years old. I do not know how I would get along in Westborough. I know I could ask my daughter, but it would be, she works, it would have to be at the tail end of her day. I am made independent. I can get around to grocery shopping, to the bank, to my doctor, to whatever I need by picking up the phone and calling the senior center and say, I've got this appointment tomorrow. Could I possibly get there? And it's the senior van without which I would not survive as an independent 93-year-old in Westborough. So, there you are, folks. That's my
Thank you so much for that example. There's a couple things I wanted to respond to in that. One being about talking about the senior center being for seniors and this idea of changing it. And I think what we're talking about are two things that are happening simultaneously. One is that there's a senior center that's currently in existence, and we're trying to make sure that people are aware of what's happening here and are feeling welcome and participating here. And simultaneously thinking about how can we do better, and what would if we were to expand or make this space more beautiful, how could we make it appealing to a broad range of residents. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned this twice in your remarks, which is about two things that you do. You pick up the phone and you call the senior center to arrange your transportation. And you pick up the newsletter and you read the newsletter and you know what's available. I think that's the piece. When we talk about people not having awareness or knowledge, I'm not suggesting that we're not doing everything we can to push the information out. I think that's happening. I think we don't have enough people who are picking up the phone or picking up the newsletter because they are not identifying with either of those things. And so it's about how do we get people to recognize that living in Westborough and taking advantage of the community means you have to pick up the newsletter and take a look or pick up the phone and call. So I think that those are really important points. I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Yes?
Hello, Anna Kung. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate all the different services that together serve the community. Whether they need some assistance in their own living, as Adriana said, or coming to recreational or exercise, because I think having this all together in one place is excellent. I think working together with the rest of the community is wonderful, but we also probably need to start marketing more on Facebook in a lot of the ways we haven't been in the past. One thing, Westborough Connects is a community group that is just putting out information on what's happening. It's in a simple format. You don't have to be on Facebook to use it.
Yep.
And that really has been helping a lot of people find the broad community.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, so Westborough Connects is another place where people can get information about what's going on about town, including things that are happening at the senior center. And I think your point about, and this is true of any kind of marketing or communication, and it has to be ongoing. It's not something we do once and then we expect everyone to know. So thinking about Facebook and social media and these other mechanisms, trying to stay current with how people are getting information is important. Thanks. Yes, I'm gonna ask.
For just a very small payment once a year. I believe it's $5.
Six.
Six now.
Postage went up.
The monthly bulletin comes right to your mailbox.
presentation. I think you did an excellent job analyzing where the needs are. I see a dilemma here. One of the points that people brought up was the cost of living in this town. Taxes are always an issue. And the other one is maybe we need a better senior center, improvement, expansion. All that costs money, right? And people don't want to pay more taxes. What we need to do is maybe prioritize better where we spend the money for the town, the budget, what is more important to the town manager, I guess, or the finance committee, whatever. So, we need to really do some more soul searching to maybe allocate a little bit more money towards improvement of the senior center, activities, building facilities, so forth. I just want to make that point clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to respond to your comment is I think correct, which is that talk of a new space means we're spending money, and we also heard that cost of living is really tight for people in Westborough, and so I think thinking about aging in Westborough as this community-wide experience, it's not just about the seniors, it's about the whole community, is one way to think about how do we coordinate with other departments in terms of what's being offered through the rec department, what's being offered through senior services, and how do we coordinate that a new building would fill multiple needs and serve multiple populations within the community is one way to think about sort of getting the best bang for your buck, so to speak. Thank you.
I'm the pastor of the Congregational Church in town, and I've pastored in other towns, and so I've seen a lot of things with senior centers. And a couple of things that just come to my mind. People here are often concerned when you have a multi-generational program center. And this town is so, everything goes towards the kids. And I've seen in other towns, and my concern is that they start encroaching upon the seniors' spaces where they need more Cub Scout rooms and places to put a basketball court. And there's always kids flying around in front of people who are struggling to get where they need to go. My other concern is with transportation. Within my own church, we have many people who would like to come to church and cannot get there. And there is no transportation available on Sundays.
Right.
So those are just things that, if anybody from the town is here, I would like them to take into consideration.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great points about the, everyone wants to think that combining multiple generations is inherently a good thing, which I believe it is, but there are also some real things, some limitations to consider, and I think that transportation limitations on evenings and weekends prohibit people from being able to do things like go to church, which I think is important.
Answering the gentleman's question
Yes.
in the back about taxes and expenses, and, do you have any recommendations as to what grants might be available to address some of these issues so that it doesn't add to the tax burden of the town? Thank you.
I can speak just from my own experiences in other communities, and I can invite anyone from the town to speak. I think there are a couple of ways that communities think about it. There's the community preservation funds, which are available to many Massachusetts communities, which can be used for a variety of different kinds of capital investments. And that's one way that people think about accessing some dollars to offset the cost. There's fundraising, private donors, and sort of general sort of community engagement around fundraising that can help, as well as thinking about debt that might be coming off the books in the future years, and how do we navigate what's coming off the books and what are we putting on the books in a way that doesn't raise taxes but rather keeps them at a relatively stable rate. And also thinking about real estate that can be sold, property that the town owns, this kind of other assets that could be accessed at the town to offset the cost. So there's just some examples. They're not, I'm sure there's many more. But I think an important point to think creatively about how we spend.
I want to say something about the transportation.
Transportation, okay.
When I had a meeting with you guys, we brought that up. Some lady said she has a problem going to the store. My question to her was, have you been to Senior Center? No. There are some people who will never get here, no matter what. One, they probably think they're too young to come. Okay? Another point is the transportation to the church. Going to church should not be the responsibility of the city. It's a church to make. In all churches that I know of, not my church, we have volunteers that pick up the members to church and take them back. So that's what the some churches should do, rather than waiting for the city to supply transportation for them to go to church. It's a choice that we make.
Thank you. Other folks? Oh. There's someone up front, Mary. And I was just going to say to the gentleman's point, I think it's really important to remember that there are people who will never come to the senior center, and that's okay. I think it's easy for those of us who are passionate about this topic to think about, we want to get everybody in town to come to the senior center. And I can tell you right now, they probably wouldn't all fit. But I think it's important to remember that not everybody will set foot here, and that's okay, but it's important to recognize that they're still part of our community, and what they need in terms of transportation or housing is still equally as important. But I think that's a great point that was made. I just wanted to reiterate that. Where's
Sorry,
Roman?
I'll come to the front next.
Okay.
Someone else.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things. Open up the little math, and that is that there's about 100 units at Walker Meadow, another 100 units at Orchard Hill, and then 700 units being projected for Del Webb, and you're talking somewhere about $8 or $9 million in taxing. It's coming in, and the seniors obviously don't use the schools and school buses, and we're quite light on the other services as well. I think that this is a tired building, and what happened in Northborough and what happened in Shrewsbury when they had a tired building is they got beautiful new senior centers. If you look at their newsletters, they offer the same activities as we do here, almost identical. I think you can't blame some of the seniors in Westborough for driving over to Northborough or driving up to Shrewsbury because they're going to a pretty fancy place. And it's no one's fault that this is an older place. It's 50 years old at least.
35.
Only 35?
34 to be exact.
That's all.
It looks older.
Thanks, Dennis.
I thought I remember seeing pictures from the 70s when it was built.
1980, we opened here in 1989, November 1989.
Shame on me. Also the location. With the parking, there's a lot of seniors that we service that are in the low-income housing in Westborough Village and Mayberry Drive and Rogers Road, and yeah, they use those are the majority of the bus people as well. But the location is outstanding. So that's the point I wanted to make, is that we are unlike other senior centers because we have a tired building as they once did. And not sure what the answer is. Thank you for your interest in your presentation tonight. Your statistics were interesting. And go from here.
That's right. We'll have to think about. Thank you. Someone says, oh.
Rose was next.
Oh. Sorry, Rose.
Where should I?
Rose was next, but okay.
I'll find you, Rose.
I just wanted to speak to the point of the combined community center. I can guarantee you, if we have a combined community center, I can guarantee you that if we have a combined community center, that it will be the camel putting his nose in the tent, and pretty soon the camel driver, which would be the senior center, but the seniors are going to be on the outside. Because absolutely everything in this town is geared towards the children. And I think if we do have some sort of a combined center, that the seniors should have the exclusive use of it for a certain period of time, and perhaps open it up to the community on the weekends or in the evenings when the seniors are not as likely to use it. I realize this building is tired. I think Alma and her staff do a wonderful job here. And where I don't participate as much as I probably should, given my age, the senior center was very important to my husband before he died.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Rose.
Say thank you for making those remarks and for sharing about how the senior center meant so much to you and to your husband, who's passed. And I think absolutely we heard over and over again how wonderful the things that are happening in the senior center are for the people who come here and use it. It's life-giving. It's a lifeline for many. And I think what we're talking about is how can we share that, and so that more people can experience it and think about it, and really raising it up as an asset of the community. So thank you for raising that issue. And you're the second person who's mentioned, this idea of, if we think about all ages, that there's a fear that it will become about school-aged children, and that's something I just want to reiterate that I'm hearing a couple of times. All right, Rose, you ready?
I wanted to make the same point that the last 2 or 3 people made. You just have to look at our town meetings to see what a very strong lobby the young people have and their parents. They seem to always are able to get whatever program they want. I love, I don't want to take anything away from school-age children. They're wonderful, but yeah, it would be hard for us to compete with them for the resources. And perhaps the schools could be open in the evening for recreation or some other way of doing it.
Yep.
And I also would like to try to be very practical in New England, even though I'm an immigrant to New England. If we could add on a few more rooms to this building and really look into how it can be redone a little bit. We don't want to be out of here for more than a year or two. But if this could be fixed up and be a good demo project for reuse, the library did not achieve approval of a very wonderful but oversized for its footprint. We have a great location here, wonderful air, fresh air, good mosquitoes, good parking lot, and near the elder housing, as Mr. Fenton said. But I think if we got just a bit more room and be kind of a center, if we suddenly find we're so popular, we need a building the side of Northborough, fine, but just add on to this so that we're not in need desperately while we wait 10 years. A lot of people don't have 10 more years to wait for one.
Yeah.
If we can just do a good, modest job and get something that's very comfortable. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks to both of you for those comments, and I think they speak to this idea of there's a need now, and thinking about a new building is wonderful, and it's not something we want to ignore, but we recognize there's a need now, and how do we accommodate that current need, whether that's
expansion or renovation of this current space, thinking about other locations in the community. You mentioned the schools, could be other places, the library, in terms of expanding the footprint. But thinking creatively about how do we adjust in the short term, I think is a point well taken, so thank you. All right, last call for questions or comments. Oh, one more.
I think when you look back at your original demographics and you can see the aging pattern, we are getting older, and therefore I think we need to be a little bit futuristic about the future, and we need to plan ahead for those folks that are in their 60s, soon will be in their 70s, and so on and so forth. And so I think there's going to be a growing need for a lot of new types of services that seniors can take advantage of. But I think to do nothing would be a terrible mistake.
Thank you for that. Yes, so going back to the beginning, which is about the size of the older adult population is growing, and we expect that to continue. And I think coupled with that is what we heard in the survey and in the focus groups is this idea people want to be active, they want to take care of themselves, they want to learn new things, they have a lot of ambitions about how they want to spend their time, and making sure that there are spaces in Westborough for people to be able to do that, or else they might think about going somewhere else to live. So, with that, I just wanted to comment and thank you all again for being here this evening. This was a wonderful turnout. Thank you to anyone who completed a survey or showed up to a focus group. We appreciate you. We appreciate the time and energy you gave. Mary mentioned the survey response of 29%. We typically say that 20% is respectable. So 29% is really amazing, and the fact that many people spoke up, I think signals to us and hopefully to the town that people care about this issue and they're paying attention. So thank you again for being here, and enjoy the spring.